Welcome to Book Passage. My name is Tina, and I'm a Louise Penny addict. I think we have a room full here. Louise Penny is a bookseller's dream. See, the first time I recommend still life to a customer, they have that usual sort of dubious but willing look about them. And then they come back maybe a week later, and they're wide-eyed, and they're buying A Fatal Grace. And finally, a week after that, they come back and they buy the entire rest of the series. And now, their eyes are kind of worshipful, and they suddenly believe I'm the best bookseller on the planet. So, for all of us who've been perpetually panting for the next story with Armand Gamache and his beautiful, damaged, scattered team at the Charité, there is How the Light Gets In. I haven't slept for the last 3 nights. Our special treat for you today is that our head book buyer, possibly a more devout Louise Penny fan than even I am, is here to talk with Louise today. It's a Louise and Louisa show up here. Louisa Smith is our head book buyer, and she's got a pretty strong mystery background herself. Her father is Martin Cruz Smith. And so I'm delighted that they're going to be here both talking together and with you today, because I think it'll be a rich experience for all of us. So join me in a warm welcome for both of them. Book Passage is overjoyed to present Louise Penny.
Can you hear me in back? Oh, good.
Oh, I was actually hoping everyone would think you were Louise. That's who I want to be.
No, I want to be you. Let's switch. You can interview me this time. I know the answers to that.
Wait, actually, before we start, can I take a picture of you guys?
Yeah.
And you have to hold up the.
Do you want me?
If you could hold up your. Yes, your copies of mine. No Kathy writes books. I personally am a big fan of hers, but honestly. Oh my God, you look great. I actually have the photograph of the crowd from last year.
Yes, indeed.
On the Facebook, you know. That's just the permanent one. So now we'll do it every year, and we'll see how well we're all aging. Smile, maybe wave. You look happy. See, now you look like I'm holding you up. We surrender. We give up. All right. Oh, lovely. Really, honestly, it's wonderful.
Hi. So how this is going to work is I'm going to interview her for a little bit, and then we will have some time for questions. So please think of questions that you would like to ask the ladies. And thank you for coming. It's wonderful to have you here.
It's such a beautiful introduction, but I have to say Book Passage is the author's dream. Honestly, this is the cornerstone of my tour. Everything else is sort of built around Book Passage and has been for a few tours. This is well, you know how lucky you are, and I know how lucky I am that I'm on your radar. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for doing this today. I know how much work goes into this sort of thing. At least it better go. It's early yet.
So here we find your team, back more on familiar ground than last book. Yeah, I don't know if you've read The Beautiful Mystery. Yeah, it's such a beautiful book. But now we're heading back to Three Pines. And yet so much is different, even though we're back sort of in a place that we know. Mm-hmm. Was it difficult approaching this book with Jean-Guy?
Oh no, let's not talk too much about it.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
With it being a different, the team.
Yeah, but that's a great question, because it is, things change, of course, through the series, and more so as the series progresses. You really pick up, as we do through life, we pick up events and emotions and wounds. It was wonderful coming back. you know, changed as it was, changed as even Three Pines is. It, having gone to away from it and spent the beautiful mystery completely away from Three Pines, not even a mention of the village or the villagers. And that was wonderful. I really had to do it, and I'm so glad I did, and I love that book. But in many ways, it's like taking the long way home, isn't it? Having been away, now coming back to it as an author. When I sat down to write How the Light Gets In, it was like discovering Three Pines for the first time, rediscovering it, going home again. You know, that had that sort of that duality of discovering it for the first time, but at the same time there was such comfort and familiarity. And I think it allowed me to not fall into, because in series, the danger is that you end up unintentionally writing the same book over and over again, especially if you have the same setting and the same sort of cadre of main characters. And so this allowed me to come at it with freshness and renewed vigor and joy. So it was, I really loved it. And I hope you enjoy being back at the bistro as well. Well, and then the rest of the village, but you know, the bistro. It's like ground zero at Three Pines. That and the bench.
And Three Pines really is another character for you in these books.
It is, yes.
And the characters developed over time, and the characters within the character develop over time.
Yes.
Are there people that you think of when you approach a book, like this time we're going to do more with this one?
Well, now that's an interesting question, because that was sort of my thinking early on, and I haven't held myself to it because I really want it to be natural in terms of which characters come to the forefront. But I did want, for instance, Clara takes the lead in the first book, and others take the lead. At one stage, we get to know Olivier and Gabri more, and Myrna a little bit more in this book, for instance, so that each character has a turn in the spotlight. And that's also another way to get away from becoming formulaic. You know, writing crime novels is very interesting because on the one hand there is a structure to it that needs to be respected, but it should never be formulaic. And as soon as it is, at least for me, then I might as well I don't want to ever phone this in, because I know how expensive things are. I know how precious your time is. You know, you can get books out of the library, but you're still devoting time, and time is so precious. And so I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want someone to do it to me. And when I feel an author is doing that, then I begin to disengage from that series.
I think we've all done that with somebody we love, and then we realize we're reading the same book. And then we don't have time to do this one more time. You know, it's wonderful that you do have a sort of fresh take every time. And I think one of the reasons it is that it's not just solving whatever the crime is in your book. There's also another arc that goes more than one book. There's the character arc you have, there's the political arc that you have, and all of them sort of coming to a head in this particular novel.
Yes.
How do you plan that? Because you have three things really in the air. Did you know you were going to do all three in this one in particular, or?
I did actually, thankfully. It didn't come as a complete surprise. In fact, when I started thinking about the fifth book, which is called The Brutal Telling, not writing it, just thinking about it, I knew how this book would end. So everything from the beginning of that book forward, and hopefully as you're reading those books you didn't realize it, because I don't want to project, or, you know, each book needs to be satisfying in itself. But don't tell anyone this, but essentially, actually almost from when they begin Still Life, because there are in this book, anyone who's read it, there are references back, things that happen in Still Life take on significance in this book that you'd never have realized reading Still Life. But when you read Still Life, you are in fact starting a 2,000-page novel. Because you don't want to scare people.
I've read somewhere that you do outline each book. Do you outline between books too? Do you write down when you started Brutal Telling and you thought of
books ahead?
Books ahead. Do you start outlining that?
Well, I do, but it's more. I for the most part keep it in my head, so that I know where it's going, and that then informs what happens with the characters. Then the outlining is an interesting thing for me because I suffered from writer's block for a long time. And in fact, I realized looking back, I tried to write a novel every decade of my life up until I finally got still life. And I wrote like the first 3 chapters and then fizzled out. And then the next decade I thought, well, now I'm smart. I can do it. I'll write another 3. And the reason I never got to the 4th chapter and certainly never got to the end, there are a couple of reasons. I think one is that I was fairly callow growing up. I wasn't one of these old souls. I was a late bloomer. I was very, very lucky in my life. Very, very fortunate. My tragedy is that I didn't realize how lucky I was. But as a result, there's a wonderful line from Auden's elegy to Yeats, and he wrote that mad Ireland hurt him into poetry. What a wonderful line. I mean, oh God, poets. It tells you everything you need to know about Ireland, about poetry, about Yeats, about Auden. Mad Ireland hurt him into poetry. 6 or 7 words. I had to be hurt into writing. I had to have gray in my hair. I had to lose enough people. I had to know sorrow and loneliness and jealousy and bitterness. And I had to come to that fork in the road where I either became embittered or compassionate. I had to have something to say. And that's why I stopped after 3 chapters, because I had nothing really to say. I was writing so that my mother would think I was smart, so that all the teachers who had failed me would say, oh, maybe we got it wrong. The woman who voices my GPS would say, recalculate. But not from my heart and soul. I was writing for the approval of others. And I realized, looking back now, how much that fueled so much of my life, so many decisions, so much of how I perceived things was through the eyes of others. Do they like me? Are they approving? Will I be approved of if I do this, that, or the other thing? And I finally, that's I'm sure I'm not the only one who's lugged that anvil around, and you get tired after a while, and finally have to stop. At least I did, and just say enough. Enough. If I'm ever going to achieve what I want to achieve, I have to let that go and risk failing and risk the censure of the very people I want approval of, and just do it. And that's where I came to it. And I was finally able to finish the book, because still life, well, I wanted it to be published. Obviously, I didn't really believe it would be, because of the chances of it being published. The publishing industry is so difficult these days. So I knew that the writing of it had to be reward enough. So it was written as a book, simply a book I would read, and that's it. And then, you know, I'm just so glad you feel the same way.
Do you still find yourself having that struggle when you approach a book? Do you still have to say it's not about?
I do. I think a little bit less so. I tell you, with the second book was very, very difficult, because it all came rushing back, because, ironically, Still Life not only was published, but was well received. And because of my personality, I wanted the second book to be better, bigger and better. And then suddenly I had people who had expectations, and I had expectations, and I was being handed everything I've ever wanted from the age of 8, when I first knew I wanted to be a writer. It was being handed to me, and I got very afraid. And I started writing the second book completely wanting the publisher to like it, wanting you to like it, wanting the critics to like it. And it was awful. It was soft and smelly. It was really bad. And I had actually suffered from writer's block for a number of years before I had written my first book. And so I was very afraid that would happen again. And so I went to a therapist. And I'm a big fan of therapy, and I'm a big fan of just asking for help. And I knew I needed help if I was going to achieve what I wanted to achieve. and because I clearly lost my way and I needed to come back. And she said the most wonderful thing. She said, the wrong person is writing this book. Now that was not initially as helpful as it might sound. Oh, what do you mean? Is my mother? Should be writing it. She said, your critic is writing the book. So you need to, yes, wow, that was one of those. And she said, you need to thank the critic, you need to bless the critic, you need to show the critic the door. But you don't be angry at the critic because you don't want to piss it off because you're going to need it later. And don't lock the door because you have to come back in. But the first draft needs to be written by your creative self from deep down inside. If you want to write 10 pages on a cup of tea, in the first draft, do it. Do it. Because it won't show up in the final. The critic will make sure. But in the first draft, just write. Write with joy, write with awareness of how lucky you are that you are not being bombed, that nobody has you in the crosshairs, that you have food on the table, that you have a brain to write, and that you have the freedom to do it and have been given this opportunity. So write with joy and just get it down. So that's what I do now. I have to remember that. Sometimes I have to really step back. I sit on the bench in our backyard and I do my sort of meditations and I ask for help and I remember just, thank you, critic, goodbye.
Now you mentioned poetry, and there's poetry in your books all the time. Of course, Ruth is an easy way to get poetry, and you also have music, and I've read that you listen to music when you write, that there's a soundtrack for every one of your novels, and that it informs the characters. And I was just wondering, what would be Armand's music or poetry if you were, or any of the other characters? Is there something that, or a line from a poem that just made you think, oh, that's them?
Gosh, that's such a great question. I'm going to have to sit here for 10 minutes and stare at myself. I often think that, that there is this bit of a shame that when you talk about planning a book, and that I spend a lot of time just staring into space, thinking about it. What a shame it is that the creative process and doing nothing look so much alike. At the same time, there is an advantage to that. Honey, I'm creating. I can't actually think of one now, but for each book there's a wonderful song by Léo Ferré called Avec le temps, which is an old song, a French song. And that really informed a lot of Bury Your Dead, which is the 6th book set in Quebec City, where Gamache is carrying around the memory of this terrible event that went wrong, and partly went wrong because of him. And he lost people very close to him in it. And Avec le temps that talks about the passage of time, what happens with grief. And do we remember the person's face? Do we remember their voice? Do we remember their love? And the final line is, with time, avec le temps, we love even more. Partly because the howl of grief disappears and the real love is left behind, the purity of it. So that really helped. Sometimes it helps me when I read poems or listen to music, sort of get to the heart of it. Sometimes it's just instrumentals that I listen to, and it helps me with sometimes the pacing of the book. I need to pick up the pacing, or maybe I need to slow it down a little bit, because for me a book that just powers through is a lot less interesting than one that powers and then slows down. It gives you a chance to think. And slowing down, I'm hoping, isn't boring. It's just giving you a chance to sort of reflect, catch your breath, and then it speeds up again.
Is that what Three Pines ends up being, sort of in this story? There's so much forward momentum with the political story happening. Does Three Pines end up being sort of
a little bit. I sometimes think some of the humor is meant to be, sort of taking a breath. It's a bit like the breath before the scream, but it is at least a breath. I'm hoping that in Three Pines that there is still, while it may not be actual action, that there is some tension, that there is still forward movement, but it's not necessarily people running around. It's more, intellectual and emotional movement.
So in How the Light Gets In, Myrna's lost a friend, and she ends up, the friend is sort of a mystery around who this friend is, and there's a history.
We want to say lost isn't, well, partly misplaced, I
Partly
guess.
misplaced.
There are other ways of...
She's been killed.
She's been killed.
She's been killed, unfortunately. And, but you bring in a lot of history of Canadian history in this book and researching who this person may have been. How was it approaching this book with trying to tie in something that was a story from when you grew up in Canada? Was it difficult to keep them separate, or did it inform what you were doing more?
This is about the Dionne quintuplets. Does anybody here remember the Dionne quints? You know, is that right? What's the birth date? May 28th. Right, but they would have been born about 30 years ahead of you, I think. At least. At least. The Dionne quints weren't born in Quebec, although that's a popular misconception, one that I had actually. Although when I read what the truth was, I remembered that, yes, that was it. They were actually born in a place called Callander, Ontario, to a Franco-Ontarian family in 1934, to a farm family in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the Depression. And she gave birth to 5 healthy girls. They all survived, and they became a phenomenon, and it was really quite vile what happened to them. On the surface, of course, they had the perfect little girl life, but without any, they had all the trappings, but they had no privacy. And it's sort of a look at what happens, a life lived completely in the public eye, and the effect that has when they get older. So that was, and because the books are about, you've talked about this before, they're probably least among the things that the books is about death. The books are about life, they're about choice, they're about duality, about how things appear and what they really are, about what's behind the facade, both the facade of houses and of a village and of a building and of a corporation, of politics, but also our own personal facades, the gap between what we say and what we think.
That's right, and so much of your books are about that, the good and the bad.
That's right.
How a police officer has to remain sort of unreadable, but what is going on inside, what's going inside the politics
Yes.
of the police force. Right? So it's so much of what you're writing about.
And how easy it is, because we have this facade, to misinterpret what people are saying. And that's interesting for me to follow as well, is where things start getting off the rails. And we as readers, because I'm writing from multiple perspectives, sometimes we realize, oh my God, they've got that wrong. The person really meant this, but it's being interpreted like this. And therefore they've gone down the wrong road, and a road that could lead to tragedy.
That's right. I think it makes such beautiful, it's just a beautiful example of what you're doing in this book.
Thank you.
Right, all the different layers that they have. And it's what makes your books unique, because they are in many ways sort of traditional golden era Christie mysteries, but there's a modern take on it. And I think the thing that makes it modern is the complexity of the characters that you have, and that there is people that get damaged by what is happening around them.
Oh, thank you. And that was important to me, is never to trivialize the impact of the death or anybody's lives. I mean, frankly, the people I write about are really much closer to the people I experience in real life than a lot of other crime novels that I read, which are fascinating, but they're not necessarily reflective of the people that I know or the person that I am. There's, you asked about the poetry. There's another line from Auden, who I just adore, and it's in his poem for Melville. And in it he wrote, evil was unspectacular and always human, and shares our bed and eats at our table, and we are introduced to goodness every day, even in drawing rooms among a crowd of faults. And that is really succinctly what my books are about, that evil is unspectacular and always human. It's like Hannah Arendt's fabulous book on the banality of evil. But we are introduced to goodness among a crowd of faults, that none of the good people are perfect either.
And I know you were a journalist for many years. Did that inform the way that you approach crime? I mean, having to report on real crime and seeing real people affected by it, does it make it, you want to make it less spectacular and maybe more about the character?
Yes, I think so. I think for me personally, the least interesting is the forensics. For me, as a journalist and as a human being, it's always more interesting to know the emotions behind it. What drove, whether a person is killed with a club or a bullet or a knife or whatever. The fact is that they're dead. How they got dead is less interesting than what powered that thrust. What was the emotion? Why did someone need to do that? And at what stage in their life, what happened to turn an apparently normal person into a murderer, that you needed to actually make a ghost? It's something that one of the few things in life that can never be undone, they had to do. And when does someone cross that line, and what has to happen? And that is, of course, what Gamache does, is he follows the rancid emotions back. So that something that for you or I would be very banal, the comment or the look or whatever the insult might have been 20 years ago, for this person it went in and then it festered. And so Gamache talks about that actually, I don't think in this book, but in another one, that for him, investigating a crime isn't about moving forward, it's about moving backward.
And he does say in this that, well, most people ask who, and they may ask how.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to know why.
Yes.
And that's what these books do so well. It's the why that
Yes.
you're really investigating in here.
Yeah, that. I think, and there's that comfort level too. That once we know, and I know that when I'm watching the news on television, and I hear about a killing, particularly a killing in my neighborhood, I want to know why, because frankly, it's very self-serving. Because I want to know, am I likely to be on that list?
Well, I'm going to turn it over to questions from the audience, but I do want to say, because we've talked a lot about your writing in general, and God, I'm such a big fan. This book, though, I do want to just say, is amazing in its pacing, amazing in how you get completely sucked in and drawn through, and it is really such an honor to have you here and such a treat. And
Thank you.
It's just a wonderful
Thank
combination.
Wonderful questions, and I think I might have skirted some of them only because they demand thought. So I'll be sitting in the hotel room tonight. I should have said this.
You can put the answers on your website.
Yes.
I'll go there and see what you say.
I'll write to you at 3 in the
Yes.
morning.
What is that?
Can you tell the people? Can you phone everybody up?
That French phrase, the staircase, what you think of when you're on the staircase.
Oh, yes.
What's that
No, I
French
can't.
phrase, I can't
No.
think of it. I'll think of it later
But
on the
some-
staircase.
Oh, but can I just mention though before we go, because each book is so intertwined, that please no spoilers. Not simply for people who've read this book, but clearly that would be nice. But if you could try not to let too much out of the bag for earlier books, because it's possible, the highly unlikely that some people here haven't read.
You tried all of Ruth's poetry.
No. She wants to know if I write Ruth's poetry, and I wish I did. And because actually that was one of the lines that recurs in this book, and we almost called it the line that recurs of one of Ruth's poetry is, "Who hurt you once so far beyond repair, that you would greet each overture with curling lip." And I was going to call it, in fact, all the way through, right to the end, even after it was shown to the editors, it was called "So Far Beyond Repair." And then I thought about it, I was on a flight to London, and I was thinking about it, I thought, that's too dark, so far beyond repair. It's not really reflective of the book as a whole and the spirit of the book. No, most of her poetry is written by two people. One, that So Far Beyond Repair line, and some other of the poems is Mariana Plessy is her name. Now, she only put out one very slim volume of poetry and then died. In fact, I'm not even sure she saw the publication, and it was put out by a good friend of hers. So it was almost, it was a very limited edition, about 50 books put out, and he gave me one of them before Still Life was published, just as a gift, because he knew I liked poetry. And they're, as you can tell, I mean, they're amazing poems. The other source for the poems is Margaret Atwood. She has a new book out, by the way. It's called Mad Adam. It finishes her trilogy. But yes, I use her poetry mostly from a book with the cheery title, Morning in the Burned House. I use it with her permission, though, clearly, because, you know, you don't want to piss off Margaret Atwood.
Yeah, how did you get into crime reporting in the first place?
She wants to know how I got into crime reporting in the first place.
Yeah.
I wasn't actually a crime reporter. I was a journalist and a host of a live radio show on CBC Radio, so it was current affairs. But a certain amount of that, of course, you were covering crime. And at one stage in my life, I was a documentary producer, so I would go out and go to crime sites or fires or accidents and things like that. So it's the sort of thing that I didn't make a specialty of, but I just happened. And you know, I've got to say, when you live and work in Quebec, and particularly in Montreal, crime is everywhere. It's, Oh, yes, I will pay. Okay. Yes.
Could you tell us when the film is going to come out, and will we be able to see it in the United States?
She's wondering about the film. There's a film that is being made of Still Life. And it's the plan of the producers is that it be the first of the series. That be sort of like Wallander, in that it would become like 2-hour films for each, based on each of the books. And so far, it has a broadcast date in Canada of mid-September on the CBC, but no broadcast date in the States yet. And I think what that's racist. Write a stern letter. I think their hope is to see how well it does and make the second film and then offer it to the States. Because to show one and then 2 years later show another, it doesn't really necessarily build up an audience for people unfamiliar with it. But if you want, you can go to cbc.ca, and I believe that there are trailers there if you're interested in seeing sort of what it is like so far. And I suspect, I'd be very surprised if they didn't put out a DVD, which of course would be available.
Have you seen it?
I have.
Do you like it?
I have. You know, what I'm going to do is not answer that question. But what I do want is if you get a chance to see it, obviously you'll decide what you think of it, and that's really what matters. What I can say is that I turned down every request to film, mostly because many of them wanted the rights to the characters so that they could turn them into a TV series. Well, that sounds good. Yes, that's how I felt. But now, why would I do that? It really, as I say in the introduction here, in the acknowledgements, I have no children. These are my children. I don't need money that badly or anything else that badly that I would give them to someone else. So I turned them down. I turned down film and whatnot. These people were Canadian. I thought that they had a better handle on the characters and whatnot. So we'll see what you think about it when you get a chance.
I happened yesterday, I read How the Light, which you sent me very nicely, thank you very much, and I hoarded it until this week, and then I sat down and read it, finished it. But I happened upon The Hangman. And talk about a why. mystery. It was brilliant.
Oh, you liked it? Oh,
I am not,
glad.
and that's saying a lot, because I am not a short story reader.
Oh, good.
You know, I'm a give me, substance and meat, and I want, the appetizer and the entree and the salad course and the cheese course and the dessert. So for me to read a short story is big. For me to love a short story is phenomenal.
Oh,
I
thrilled.
loved it.
Thank you.
It-
Did I write it?
Oh,
Did I
yeah.
write it? No, she's talking about it. It's a copyright. That's what she's talking about. Please stop talking already.
It was quite remarkable.
She's talking about a novella that I wrote called The Hangman, which is gamache and 3 pines. But it was written for a specific purpose. It was written, and it's not part of the series, although it has the same characters, not put out by the same publishers at all. It's put out by a small Canadian publisher called Ruths Press. And I did it for literacy. The literacy people got in touch with me and asked, because I'm quite involved in literacy campaigns in Canada, if I would write a novella for emerging adult readers so that they don't have to read See Spot Run or anything that would be complex ideas, complex characters, short enough so that it's not that big a commitment, and written at roughly a grade 3 level. So it took me. One day maybe you'll be able to read one of the books. But now it's not, the Hangman isn't really available anymore. It's because they had a limited run. But you can get it on ebook.
Yes.
Yes, you can download it if you're interested. But please be aware, because I go onto Amazon every now and then and read some reviews, and some of the people who read it are quite upset, partly because it's shorter than they expected, and it is written. I kept trying to keep Hemingway in my mind when I was writing it. Just keep it simple, keep it clear, keep them short sentences, and hope that people who have the courage, can you imagine the courage it takes as an adult to say, I need help, I don't read, I don't write, I need help.
I will review it, and it was brilliant.
And you can also get a Kobo, which links for ebooks to independent bookstores if you're desperate for the Hangman and you don't want to buy from the other store. The back. It's called Kobo. We do sell them here. Most independents sell them, and it's how you can buy ebooks and support your local independent bookstore. You do it through it. So we can help you with that if you have a question about that.
Should we do someone at the back? Yes.
This is my first time to hear you. I'm probably asking you a question that everybody else knows the answer to. And that is, Gamache seems so real, so human. And I'm wondering, did you have an inspiration for him? Was he based on someone you knew or know?
Yes, as a matter of fact, he is. I didn't realize it for the longest time. I thought that this was pure genius on my part. Channeling. And then I looked across the table and realized he's actually my husband. Don't tell him that. My husband Michael he's now retired, but he was the chief of hematology at the Montreal Children's Hospital. And he's really the doctor you never ever want to have to meet. He dealt with children with cancer. It was the worst job in the world, and he had his first named chair in Canada in pediatric hematology. He was a senior investigator in North America into the disease and did a lot of breakthroughs that helped with the treatment. And when he started, 80% of children died, and by the time he finished, 80% survived, partly because of his research. And then he used to wear bow ties, and so that when he would lean over these, and they would have balloons and teddy bears and Mickey Mouse, so that when he'd lean over the children, that's what they would see. They wouldn't see the scary. And he told young parents things no young parent should ever have to hear. And he sat with the children through the night. And he came home every day, and he was and continues to be the most joyous man I know. Not because that gave him pleasure, but because he understands how precious life is. And what a betrayal of those young people who don't get to live it if those of us who do don't live it with joy, don't live it with gratitude, don't live it in the light, don't make that choice every day when it is so easy to make the other choice. So he knows that, and it is a choice every day. He could become embittered and cynical and dark. He chose not to. And he shares that with Gamache, or Gamache shares that with him. That he is a joyous and happy and loving and kind and a good man, a decent man, not because he's too stupid to know how cruel the world is, but because he knows how cruel the world is and he knows how precious life is. He is a man who has seen the worst and believes the best.
Wow. Does he have a brother?
She asks, does he have a brother?
I'm wondering about the food. You make me hungry every time I read it. Where's your inspiration?
You know, I am so lucky, as you could probably gather. When I start to write a book, it's generally in the winter. So winter in Quebec is quite an experience. So it's generally snowing out and cold and blowy, and I have a fire. I sit here, my laptop is on a blanket box, the fireplace is on, the dog is on the hearth rug. Michael is behind me pretending to do whatever, write and stuff, but I think he's playing Sudoku. And I have a pile of poetry books and I have a pile of cookbooks. And so when they go into the bistro or whatever, if it's lunch, I just think, oh, what do I like? But it's a magical place, 3 Pines. But I don't know if you've noticed, nobody gains weight. Nobody exercises. There's not a vegetable inside. What do you think the woman in the yes, agree.
You said that Gamache resembles your husband. What character most resembles you?
Who am I? Who am I? There's an existential question. Who am I? I would like to say Reine Marie, but I am not Reine Marie. Partly because she's just not, central enough, and my ego demands it. Clara. Clara. She creates art. I have so many friends who create different things, jewelry, dance, they're in theater, they write. And while the creativity comes out in different sort of plumes, different ways, it's all from the same wellspring. And so I think I understand Claire's insecurity. I sure understand her insecurities and her dreams. Writing A Trick of the Light was particularly interesting as she's walking toward her big art show, and that's how I feel. That's how I felt last week, and how I still feel on tour. It's like, oh my God, this is, my book is out, how are people going to like it, and what's it going to be like, and I have all these preconceived ideas that I'm trying to set aside, and all the fears and insecurities come up. So it really is, it's Clara.
Yes, I'm amazed since your books are so beautifully written that you can do that so quickly.
She was saying how brilliant I am. No, saying that the books are nicely written and that I can write a book a year. And how does that happen? That's an interesting question. I don't really know. I think maybe I had a lot to say when I finally started saying it. I actually think about a book when I'm finishing the first draft of one book. I'm beginning to think seriously about the next book. I'm not disengaging from that book, but that's probably why it feels almost like non-stop, because in my mind it actually is sort of non-stop. and many of the themes continue. And I choose themes that seriously and genuinely interest me. But for instance, The Beautiful Mystery, I was deeply interested in those issues, all the issue of the power of music, transformative power of music, the history of Gregorian chants, of what happens when good people who have chosen a really rigorous lifestyle and an unusual one to live in the middle of nowhere as monks, when there is a schism and both sides genuinely believe they know the will of God, what happens within a closed community? And I find those questions deeply satisfying, and so for me it's actually not that difficult to do it. It does get a little tiring, though, I must say, and so I try to, and my problem is I can't ever disengage because I keep them in my head all the time. When I'm flying now, I wear my iPod and I listen to the How the Light Gets In soundtrack, and I look out the window and I think about the next book, which I'm actually writing right now. So it doesn't feel like there's any downtime. And it does get a little bit tiresome, but that's where I have to say I didn't mean necessarily for this to happen. But I'm very, very lucky that I genuinely chose characters whose company I enjoy, because I really literally I live with them in my head so much and gamache. So, but it's not onerous. It's not difficult. Oh yes.
Clearly, light is a recurrent theme in your books. Where does that come from?
She's wondering about light and how light is a recurring theme, and it really is, and why that is. I think it's because of the, having reached that fork in the road myself, and realizing that I could, and did for many years, become cynical and dark and negative, and what it did to me, that it wasn't the better angels of my nature, and I could have continued down that road, and it's a road that is often rewarded these days. Being nice isn't often rewarded. In fact, if you say, oh, so-and-so is nice, that's almost an insult. I don't know how we got to that stage, but I know that for me, that's how I felt for many years. Oh, he's nice. Well, I couldn't say much worse than that. Or they're a good person. And you wanted to be in the table with the clever people. So I think for me, when I realized that this wasn't serving me well, that I needed to change, and that I needed to, and I really see it. I see it. It's a very visual image of standing in the light, choosing to step aside. I choose my friends very carefully, because I know that I am fairly impressionable. Less so now, thank God. But there was a time when I was deeply impressionable, and if I was around cynical, negative, dark people who like to find fault, well, it wasn't very long before I was doing exactly that. But if I'm around good, kind, thoughtful people who are just nice, then that's going to bring out the best in me as well. So I choose my company quite carefully these days.
And we didn't touch on it, but it's a wonderful line from the Leonard Cohen song. Can you tell them what the
thank you.
title
Yes,
is?
yes, it is appropriate to mention it now. This title of the book, How the Light Gets In, comes from a stanza of a Leonard Cohen poem that he turned into a song. The song's called Anthem, which I will not now sing due to popular demand. But I will recite it for you, and not the whole thing, just the stanza, a couple of lines. And then it goes, ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. And for someone who is guided and ruled by the approval of others, by needing always to have the perfect offering, and feeling if I couldn't, then it wasn't worth offering, or creating, or putting the effort in, or exposing myself. Reading that stanza, that was before I even started writing, was very freeing as well.
It's wonderful. Okay. Right there, yes.
I remember, I've read all of your books, and I'm going to try to be careful what I say. But I remember when the light gets in, How the Light Gets In, that you had mentioned I also read your blog, that it was very important to you for personal reasons, that particular book. Now,
You're thinking of A Trick of the Light, I
I'm
believe.
sorry, yes, The Trick of the Light, you're absolutely right.
Yes.
So, in each case, I'm guessing there's some reason why certain theme ends up in a book. I mean, another theme occurs to you or whatever. And I grew up with the myth or the legend of the Dionnes. My mother named me after one of them, and so this caught my eye. Since you mentioned it, I wasn't going to mention the name. What about them attracted you to?
I'm sorry, of who?
The
Dionne twins. Okay,
Yeah, what
yes.
about them attracted you to think about them with regards to your writing?
Well, it was just so sad, so tragic. These children who were so taken advantage of and so innocent and so, and I could see such parallels today to all these reality shows. You know, Honey Boo Boo. I mean, it just breaks my heart. And I, you know, I don't watch it because I can't. I'm sure, you know, God willing, she will turn into a lovely, happy person. I don't care, you know, if she's whatever, as long as she's happy and whatnot. But you know, some of these reality shows, it's just vile what's happening to them. So I could see, for me, a parallel. And again, that duality, that the parading them around in all their finery and giving them all the toys and the celebrity, and thinking that celebrity was itself a product. It's not. It's empty. It's smoke and mirrors. And so that also interests me. What's real and what is an illusion.
I think one more question.
Oh, thank you. And mostly, what surprises me about the books is how in each book the characters get deeper and deeper and deeper, which is something, like you said, we don't see in series. So it's two questions really. Did you set out to write a series from the get-go? And I'm so glad I have the chance to ask you. My question is that in The Beautiful Mystery, and I hope it's not a spoiler.
Oh, yeah, no, maybe be
It's
very
about
careful.
Jean-Guy.
Yeah, no, maybe
No,
you can,
not
I'm sorry.
I want just.
Maybe we can talk after.
That would be
All right, why don't we talk after?
I would love that.
All right, because really Jean-Guy turning into a werewolf, we probably. Yes, thank you for being sensitive to that.
And so the question is,
Oh,
did
but
you set out to?
Did I set out to create a series and to have the characters evolve? Was that the plan from when I was thinking of Still Life? It was certainly my hope that it would turn into a series, because I love reading series. So it was my hope, without expectation that it would happen, that I would be lucky enough to do it. I had no idea, to be honest with you, when I was planning Still Life, in terms of planning for the series, my only thinking was that I wanted each of the 4 books to be set in a different season in Quebec, because I wanted the setting and the seasons to be characters. And I wanted there to be a very clear sense of place. Because it's quite unusual, not that many books are set in Canada actually, so I really want, and I love where I live, like you love where you live, and so they're love letters. It gave me pleasure to write that, to write those, you know, the setting. And the other thing was that I created the characters, again, thinking that if I was fortunate enough and my dreams came true, and I needed to live with them, that I could live with them for the rest of my life. But I hadn't really, to be honest, when Armand Gamache comes out of his door or kneels down beside Miss Jane Neal on the first page of Still Life, I didn't know how this book would end. So for me, that's also fun. It's that balance we talked about planning and structuring something. For me, it's always the trying to structure it enough so that each book, so that I have a starting point, some idea of where I'm going, but not so tightly that there's no room for inspiration, for the grace notes to come in. And so that's always sort of the challenge. So it's been fun for me to explore the characters and as they go forward. Clearly though, as the series has gone on, it's become clearer and clearer to me where I want to and where they need to go. Thank you. Good
No,
question.
thank you. It's,